Hello and welcome. You're tuned into Revision Hub with Jazzy Jane. I'll be continuing to look at exam practice, which is an AQA topic, and it looks at methods in particular, which features in AS Paper 1 and Paper 2, and A Level Paper 1, Paper 2, and Paper 3. Last video, we looked at the different types of methods, including documents, content analysis. Before we continue on paper or flashcards, quickly jot down what you remember from my previous video. You will only know this if you revised, rested, tested, and repeated yourself. Supposedly, if you do not remember a particular section, please feel free to go back to my playlist where you will find all videos on methods. So before we begin, let's look at the different types of groups. Pause and have a think what two types of groups are there when we look at experiments. Pause and have a think. Okay, let me reveal there are two types of groups. The first group is known as an experimental group. Experimental group is where the independent variable is changed, whilst the control group is where variables are kept constant. So some of you who are studying BTech science or biology or any of those sort of forms of sciences, you'll be knowing what independent variable is, dependent variable. So all of these really link when we look at experiments, and especially if you're doing psychology, then some methods should actually link with the other subjects. So it's really good in that way. To begin with, I'll be looking at lab experiments. So with lab experiments, you need to understand there's a lot of physical and psychological harm that can be involved. When you're being in a lab, it may be artificial, unnatural. So that means that we're not able to get reliable, valid sort of data. It's a high cost and high time because you need to test it. It needs to go under ethical consent from the funding bodies before you actually test it, and you have to repeat the testing of the lab experiments so able to find correlations and trends and patterns. So it's a very costly and time consuming process. It needs, obviously, as I mentioned, high amount of validity because you can see how people behave, why they're behaving in a particular way or form. You need consent because sometimes if there is a lack of consent, then it's unethical and funding bodies will not be giving you some form of funding. So consent is a very important process there, and consent is very, very important, which Stanley did not give, hence why it caused a lot of physical psychological harm as well. We'll look at Stanley in just a bit. Hawthorne effect, we looked at Marston in my previous video, so go back to that. And again, Marston is mentioned. So let's look at Stanley. So Stanley did a lab experiment to see who obeyed, but in reality he told them that they're doing an experiment to find out something. Okay, so they gave them 450 volts and wanted to see who obeyed Stanley. Okay, and they found that people obeyed him, and when they knew that, okay, after the experiment finished, that this was actually what Stanley was researching, then that caused a lot of physical and psychological harm to them because they felt that they needed their consent, which Stanley did not gain before doing the experiment. There's a lot of physical psychological harm because 450 volts, you can imagine if you hear that and you have to provide shock onto each other or yourself, then it's something which you'll not be able to do personally. I wouldn't be able to do it either. So we looked at Bandura. Bandura, if you study media, we look at Bandura too. So Bandura, Albert Bandura, looked at the Bobo doll experiment. So he did in a room where there's children who watched someone punch a Bobo doll. Then those children were put into a room where there was no one, and they were told to punch the Bobo doll in the same way, and even worse, they punched the Bobo doll. So he replicated the behavior that they saw the person that was demonstrating to them. So this was a lab experiment that was done. So you can use Albert Bandura as well as Stanley within your answer. Zimbabwe again looked at a prison cells. So if you want to find out more about Zimbabwe, please feel free. But I think two examples of Stanley and Bandura are enough within your paper that you write and question. So Zimbabwe, I don't think you really need it, but it'll be good if you want to know more sociologists. Field experiments. So field experiments are conducted in a natural setting. So physical and psychological harm, obviously, if consent is not given. High time and costs because it'll be very time consuming for you to get consent, do those DBS checks, and with it, especially if you're entering within the school environment, all things like dates keeping, putting a show, all of these really, really result in high time and a high cost. And I mentioned that it's a natural setting. Again, as I mentioned again, gatekeeping theory, where Alkinson argues that they are put up in the show. So, no, not putting and putting up a show. So, two things that need to be combined when we're looking at this in paper one. High amount of validity, because you can see attitudes, behavior, reasoning, why, since it's a natural setting. So, you can see how this links. Consent from school, again, may be very difficult. Consent from parents, because they may feel targeted as a result, physical, psychological harm there. We look at young and woman. He did an experiment on spurters, so based on how people were labelled and whether they were called spurters or not and how it affected their grades. It had a high amount of reliability because it was repeated 242 times. However, it's now stopped and they don't allow to do it because it has various different ethical issues with it. Validity, they found that they argued that the way the person was labeled, the teacher acts with them in the same way. However, that's criticized by many sociologists, saying that that's not the way and that's not really true, supporting with their research. We look at women who looked at prison cells and went in and said that they were hearing voices when in reality they were not. They were treated as though they were mental patients and they were put in prison cells because they were writing on mental health cells, and because they were writing on papers and they thought that they were actually mental. And the hospital staff, there was no control over them, so that had a huge effect on if they were put into the mental health cell or not. So a woman is a good research of a field experiment that was used. So again, as I mentioned, control over. And Zimbabwe again comes in here as well. Then we look at experiments generally. Harvey, Stalin, Charkinethel, Marson. So let me go through each of them. Harvey and Stalin, so students, so teachers were given pictures of students and they were told to label them. And teachers were very smart enough. Some of them who they taught, some of them realized the patterns, that it was class and ethnicity and stuff like that. And then they found out that those people teachers labeled were of a lower class and were of very deprived ethnic minority group. So Harvey and Stalin was a type of experiment that was also conducted. Chuck and Ethel, 1/3 university students, were told to teach a student, and 1/3 of them were told that he has a very high IQ, 1/3 were told that he's very dumb, 1/3 were given no information. Those population of 1/3 that were told that has a high IQ responded well, used very good body language, and really taught the child well, whilst those two other groups did not teach the child very well either. Marson, again, we look at it and he told teachers to predict students' grades on their work that they've done. Then they put the students in an exam hall, made them do an exam, and then they told the teacher to write what you predict as them after the mocks. And the teacher saw this footage and found that those people who she predicted at the start lower were those students who were predicted higher. With Harvey and Stalin's research, there's a lot of artificiality because they use photos instead of actual students. Chuck and Ethel, again, lots of problems there because there's a lot of physical, psychological harm that was caused to the child. Was their consent? All of these things were not considered when doing Chuck and Ethel's research. So, after explaining each study right now, I want you to, in the comment section, write what type of experiments do you think these sociologists fall into. Are they field experiments, are they lab experiments, or other type of experiments? I will see if you are right there. What we have learned, so I hope you've learned about the different type of experiments, and this is the end of the research method topic. So please look at how to answer the exam questions on my YouTube channel playlist, which I'll be putting up on the next slide. And please remember to revise, rest, test and repeat yourself the content in this video and all other previous videos that I've made. And do not forget to love Canva, so please subscribe to my channel, comment if you do not understand any content, I'll be willing to explain that, and please press a bell icon to never miss my video. And don't forget, I am on Instagram, so please scan me, Revision Hub Jazzy J. I'll be willing to follow any one of you, and if we have enough, then I'll be able to do live sessions as well. And that is only possible if you guys A, subscribe to my channel, and B, follow me on Instagram. I love to see more response because the work I'm putting in, I'm not really seeing results of it. Maybe because it's not exam time currently, but maybe I will, so I hope I do. Till then, thank you so much for tuning in into Revision Hub with Jazzy J. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.